Introduction to Greek Mythology. Daphne doesn't want to become a tree. What's wrong with me? I turned into Dephiny, the laurel goddess that Apollo liked. Thinking about the end of becoming a tree, Dephiny felt uneasy in his heart. So he wanted to escape this fate and work hard to cultivate. Chapter 1. Reincarnation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I'm a little bird, how can I fly? A boy with light golden hair and red eyes was singing in a dilapidated music room. Suddenly, a burst of curses came from the side. Siming, that B*T*H is singing. It's already 10 p.m. now, isn't your grandmother sleeping yet? His name is Gu Yen, and he is a prospective college student who has just graduated from high school. He suddenly wanted to find a place where no one else could sing a song, but he didn't expect that the sound insulation would be so poor that it would disturb people. So he felt embarrassed and rubbed his head, apologizing loudly, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be so loud." Subsequently, more voices came cursing and cursing. "Mad, take a look at what time it is now, it's 10 o'clock. You're really not sleeping at 10 o'clock, right? Can you sleep or not? Apologize to ****. So the whole building began to shout, and then the dark windows began to light up bit by bit, as if looking for the person who disturbed the people in the middle of the night. Seeing this scene, Gu Yen looked around awkwardly. For a moment, he felt a bit embarrassed as so many people were awakened by him. So I quickly left here, thinking that I would apologize tomorrow when their anger subsided. I came to the garden to relax, but unfortunately, a meteorite suddenly fell and hit Gu Yen, who was really walking. The Leonid meteor shower from the Andromeda galaxy descended on the tipping gardens in the city of Rakshasa, resulting in one person's death, as reported in today's evening news. Legend has it that in the endless chaos, there is a deity named Chaos who is invisible and seemingly tangible. And after a long, long time, under the influence of unknown circumstances, His Highness Chaos inexplicably gave birth to 5 primordial gods. The first was the goddess Gaia, who symbolized the boundless earth. The second was Erebus, who symbolized the endless darkness. The third was Tartaros, who symbolized the intertwining hell of darkness and earth. The fourth was Nichols, who symbolized the darkness and the unfathomable fate. The fifth was Eros, who symbolized love and desire. The fifth primordial god, Eros, fell in form and emotion shortly after his birth, and then his power of love drifted around in the world where Chaos was born. In the world of Chaos, the goddess Gaia, who was in a daze, suddenly caught a gust of wind from her hem, and then she became pregnant. The goddess Gaia gave birth to 3 gods, namely Uranus, the god of the vast and boundless sky, Pontus, the god of the concave earth, and Urea, the god of the convex mountains. Later, because Uranus was more eloquent than his brothers, he won the love of the Earth Mother Gaia, and became the husband of the Earth Mother Gaia. Later, the Earth Mother Gaia made Uranus the first god-king and gave birth to 12 titanic gods. On the other hand, Mother Gaia and another child, Pontus, gave birth to 5 ocean gods who symbolized the 5 faces of the ocean. And the brutal rule of the first god King Uranus left the gods in unbearable pain. Later, due to the birth of several ugly giants from his mother Gaia, he stuffed them back into the belly of the goddess Gaia. Subsequently, the mother of the earth Gaia, along with her youngest son Cronus, directly overthrew the rule of Uranus and had Cronus use the black stone sickle nurtured from her body to cut off Uranus's reproductive organs. It is unknown whether it was intentional or unintentional, but it fell into the body of Pontus. Afterwards, the world law wanted to turn His Highness the Divine King into a goddess, but he was unwilling. Therefore, the world law forcefully separated Uranus from the Earth Mother Gaia and allowed Uranus to sleep forever in the deepest part of the sky. But he cursed Cronus before he fell asleep, he would be overthrown by his child. The warrior who overthrew Uranus became the second divine king with the help of his mother and other brothers, and his sister Rhea became his wife. But because Rhea gave birth to a child, he was very afraid, so he ate his newborn child until the 6th. Because Rhea had accumulated a long time of maternal love, she replaced her youngest son with a stone, named Zeus. Later, with the help of various gods, Zeus successfully overthrew the divine king of Cronus. But before Cronus fell from the throne, he also cursed Zeus, and Zeus would be overthrown by his youngest son. Afterwards, Zeus and various gods gave birth to his descendants, including the new generation of sun gods and future main gods. And on the earth, a goddess is giving birth. Our story begins, as the protagonist Gu Yan travels through the world of this deity. Where is this? Who are you? And who am I? What am I going to do? Gu Yan pondered slowly with his own mind. Yu reading www.uukangshu.net. Later, he was born and fell to the ground with a loud bang. A male god immediately picked him up and angrily said to the goddess who had just given birth, "Clemene, what do you mean?" Clemene just glanced at the child in the arms of the male god and said disdainfully, "It's just a demigod. What else do you want? We're just a one-night stand, my dear brother Kophian." After speaking, Clemene left. This Clemene is one of the 3,000 ocean goddesses, Okeanides, of the ocean god Okeanos and the mother of water, Thesis. She walked out of her own path, from a small Haining Fu to a powerful deity. And Gu Yan's father, Kophian, was the son of the mother of water, Taishi, and the ocean god Okeanos, and also one of the river gods. Afterwards, whether it was a coincidence or an intention, there was also a goddess giving birth in the valley not far from Gu Yan. She gave birth to a deity, who quickly grew up upon birth and was given a name by the laws of the world. Around him, there was also a goddess named Ning Fu who was born out of him to serve him at any time. But Gu Yan had a bewildered expression on his face. He waited for a long time, but his body had not changed at all. He was still like a baby. Subsequently, the laws of the world casually and perfunctorily gave him the name Depheny. And then there was no more. Afterwards, Gu Yan said, "No, the river god Kophian, the father of Dephini, carried him back to the river where he lived. I don't know if it's guilt or something, but the river god Kophian dotes on Dephiny to the best of his ability, giving him whatever Dephiny wants. Therefore, Dephinius also grew up steadily, and he had great trust in his father, the river god Kophian." Chapter 2. Planning to Seal the Gods. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 18 years later, Dephiny finally reached adulthood. At this point, he also understood that the reason why the person born on the day of his birth was able to grow up in one day was because he was a deity, and from birth he was an adult. Although his parents are both gods, he is only a mere demigod, and to some extent, he is not as powerful as some demigods. You should know that some demigods have no divine personality and are no different from gods, and there are even some powers that are stronger than even gods. Thinking of this, Ludwig felt a little unwilling. He came to a world that could last forever, but could only have a short lifespan of a few decades. He was unwilling. The lifespan of Ningfu and the demigod is probably several hundred years, but if we adjust it here, otherwise it feels like there is no need for humans to appear. Thinking of all the absurd speculations in his past life, Dephiny also wanted to give it a try. In my past life, I learned that in the world of chows, as long as I swear by the laws of the world and say something new, I can become a deity. At this point, Dephiny gritted his teeth and showed a determined gaze, saying, "The laws of the world, I am Dephiny. I have observed that the world lacks ice and snow, and I hope to see ice and snow." After finishing speaking, Dephiny waited here for a long time, and then a row of black birds flew by, seemingly mocking the half-god below who looked like a fool. Dephiny has a black face on his face. Why can't he? Isn't it possible to get such a priest by just moving his mouth? Why can't he? Is it true that one's identity is destined? A demigod can only be a demigod. Am I going to die in a few decades? Dephiny was unwilling and looked at the dense forest in the distance with a reluctant expression. No, there must be some way. You know, in mythology and legends, there are also examples of nymphu, demigods, and even human sealing gods, which must be something I didn't think of. DeFini suddenly calmed down. In fact, DeFini's thinking is correct, but he has thought too much. What he just thought was actually not wrong, swearing to the laws of the world that this way of obtaining a priesthood is right. But only gods can obtain it, right? It should be said that only gods deserve attention to the laws of the world. Others, such as the demigod nymphu, are almost impossible to be favored by the laws of the world unless they are extremely lucky. And humans are even less likely. How can we draw attention to the laws of the world? Depheny felt lost and wanted to go home and ask his father, the river god Koffian. With this in mind, Depheny returned to the palace of his father, the river god Koffian, and sought answers from his father, the river god Koffian. His father, the river god Koffian, was puzzled as to why Depheny suddenly asked about this matter, as he had always been carefree before. So he nervously asked Delphine, "What's wrong with you? Delphine, why did you suddenly want to become a god? I remember no one was bullying you." Upon hearing the question from the river god Koffian, Depheny shared his concerns with him. His father, the river god Koffian, fell silent and let out a deep sigh. It took a long time for the river god Koffian to say to Depheny, "My child, is not that I don't help you, but that the demigod really has almost no chance of becoming a god. If you were nymphu, that would be great. If you are nymphu, with your beautiful and unparalleled face, there will definitely be a male god who will take notice of you and give you a divine title, but you can't do it. And I know your personality. You seem to be very hesitant about this aspect, so I didn't mention it to you either. And, I'm not favored by my parents. I think it's almost impossible to seek help from my parents," river god Koffian said hesitantly to Depheny. Depheny looked at his father, the river god Koffian, with a lonely smile on his face and said, "Thank you, father. You have considered so much for me. I want to know if there is any other way to become a god besides what you said. Is it difficult to achieve success and can only rely on the gods to seal the gods? This is unfair." Dephiny looked at the vast and boundless sky with some unwillingness. Depheny suddenly felt how grand the grand sky was, and how small and unloved he was. His father, the river god Koffian, sighed and said, "I'm sorry, Depheny. I'm useless. If my power were any stronger, I could make you a god, but unfortunately, I'm just a god with weak divine power. Do you know that under a god with weak divine power, there are demigods or nymphu? So, except for having an eternal life and a weak priesthood, I am nothing different from you." River god Koffian looked at Depheny with tears in his eyes. Depheny looked at the crying river god Koffian and immediately said, "Father, how could you be useless? If it weren't for you, how could I have survived on this land? If it weren't for your favor, how could I have been happy? You are the greatest god in my heart." After Depheny finished speaking, the laws in the sky seemed to distort for a moment, but then the wave disappeared. River god Koffian looked at Depheny with some reluctance and hesitated, saying, "If your mother is here, maybe it's possible for her to accept you as a divine being, but..." Before he finished speaking, the river god Koffian sighed. He knew that his sisters, Clemene, as a famous goddess, could pay such a precious price for the descendants of one night stand. For the goddess of fame, Clemene, pursuing fame is what she wants to do the most, and for her, happiness is what she should do the most. And you should know that conferring a divine title would consume a large amount of the main god's essence. Who would pay such a price for a nymphu? In the entire world of chows, it is not common to confer divine titles. When the river god Koffian mentioned the goddess of fame, Clemene, Depheny keenly grasped that Clemene was one of the 3,000 ocean goddesses, Oceanides, before Clemene. How did his mother become a deity? Clemene was also nymphu before. Not much more noble than him, now Clemene has become a goddess of fame. So Depheny asked the river god Koffian, "How did my mother deify her? Can I know?" Unexpectedly, the river god Kophian shook his head and showed a puzzled expression. After careful consideration, he said, "I don't know. I remember when I met her, she was already a goddess of fame." Chapter 3. The Arrival of Apollo. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dephini looked anxiously at the river god Kophian and said, "Father, can you think carefully again? Please, this is very important to me." Upon hearing Dephiny's words, the river god Kophian pondered for a moment, casting aside all his impressions of the goddess of fame, Clemene. He only knew that Clemene had suddenly become a god. So the river god Kophian shook his head helplessly and said to Dephiny, "I really don't know what's going on, Clemene. She suddenly became a god." Dephiny forced a smile and said to the river god Kophian, "Thank you, my dear father. I'll think of another way." Later, Dephiny left the palace of the river god Kophian and came to the earth. He bored himself on the earth, using his thin divine power to condense some water, and then there was no more. Dephiny's divine power was depleted, he only condensed a fist-sized water ball, and his divine power was depleted without a trace. After his divine power was depleted, Dephiny could only play with the water condensed from his divine power in boredom. Apollo, who was in the sky, lowered his head for some reason and suddenly saw playing with the water ball condensed from his divine power. He felt his heart start to beat, as if he had seen his most inseparable half. Dephiny also seemed to have a feeling, suddenly looking towards the sky, a pair of sky-blue eyes shining brightly were staring at him. Looking at this dazzling sun, Dephiny doesn't understand why. This is Apollo. My mom. He has become a man, why did Apollo fall in love with him? Isn't it true that he fell in love with me because of the love arrow of little Eros? What's going on with this cannibalistic gaze? Dephiny looked at Apollo above with some fear, but still forced a smile. When Apollo, who was driving the sun chariot, saw the charming smile, he felt it was like a flower on an April day, the most beautiful and gorgeous. So he wanted to go down and get to know this charming deity, who ignited the fiercest desire in his heart and wanted him to stay by his side forever. But his sister, the forest and hunting goddess Artemis, suddenly stopped Apollo and said to him, "Brother Phobos, you still have to fulfill your religious duties." Phobos is Apollo's affectionate nickname. Upon hearing the words of the forest and hunting goddess Artemis, Apollo could only reluctantly listen to the consequences of not fulfilling his duties. And Dephiny below was stunned. What was going on with Apollo? If it weren't for the forest and hunting goddess Artemis stopping him, wouldn't he have come down? Is my charm so great? Dephiny took a photo of the reflection on the water, his golden slightly curled long hair casually spreading around him. His emerald green pupils were trembling slightly, like the cutest kitten playing coquettish with you. That pair of smiling lips revealed a hint of surprise, and the tall bridge of the nose became the finishing touch of this moving picture. Phaeton, dressed in pure white, is adorned with mountains, rivers, flowers, plants, and trees, which further highlights his handsomeness. Heton. A garment similar to a bedsheet, commonly worn by men in ancient Greece. That beautiful and handsome appearance can even be compared to the goddess of love and beauty, Aphrodite, but the goddess of love and beauty, Aphrodite, is the beauty of temptation in women, while Dephiny is the color of men and youth. If it weren't for the early birth of the goddess of love and beauty, Aphrodite, perhaps the beautiful priesthood would have been inherited by Dephiny. But the owner of this handsome appearance, Dephiny, was worried. He was afraid and had become a man. Surprisingly, Apollo would still fall in love with him, even though there was no love arrow left. Will he still inherit that ending, become a laurel tree, and have his body broken by Apollo as an embellishment on his crown? Thinking of this, Dephiny felt a wave of panic. No, it's different now. The ending was because Dephiny happened to run to the side of the river god Kophian in order for him to turn him into a tree. But now things have changed. What if he really doesn't have time to be played with by Apollo? When he thinks about this, Dephiny panics. What if he really loses his virginity? Although Apollo had relatively high moral standards compared to other gods on Mount Olympus, it didn't feel much higher. What if I'm played with? Thinking of this, Depheny's heart began to feel heavy. He was just a small demigod, and his father, the river god Kophion, was just a weak deity. His grandparents could hardly care about him as a small demigod. How could I refuse Apollo's plea for love? You should know that gods are selfish, they must get what they want, let alone such a small demigod. Thinking of this, Dephany couldn't help but show a hint of despair. The damn meteor brought him to this lascivious world, but did not give him the identity to protect himself. Can't we make him a god? Even the future Queen Persephone is fine. Although Persephone was played with by her brothers in the early stages and later snatched away by the Hades, she lives forever under the earth, but she is powerful in the later stages. After growing from a small seed god to the underworld, even the fourth divine king was conceived from her belly. Ah, if only I were a deity, then I could experiment with my thoughts. Thinking of this, DeFini couldn't help but scratch his golden hair. Later, Depheny perked up again, because he didn't want to accept his fate. He wanted to break this damn fate, and he didn't want to be betrayed by men, even if this deity was powerful and handsome. Subsequently, Depheny left this place and quickly headed towards the river controlled by his father, the river god Kophion. After all, his father, the river god Kophion, is a deity. With him, he can basically set foot in some places, but it's best to let him accompany Depheny to be safer. When he arrived at the palace of the river god Kophion, Dephinius excitedly rushed towards the direction of the river god Kophion. The river god Kophion showed a loving expression on his face and said, "My child Dephany. What's wrong with you? You ran so fast." Dephiny shared her newly thought with the river god Kophion, hoping that he could accompany her in the search. Who knew that river god Kophion shook his head and said, "My child, I'm sorry I can't leave the range of this river. Except for the once every 10 years overseas trip, I have to keep it here." Chapter 4. Disfigurement. You are listening at novelfull.audio. River god Kophion sighed and said helplessly, "This river is my place of fulfillment and also the place I need to protect. When this river disappears, I will also become a demigod, just like you." "Father, if your river grows stronger, will you grow?" said Dephany, knowing the meaning of the river god Kophion. The river god Kophion shook his head helplessly and said, "I always want my river to grow stronger, but when I grow stronger, it will invade the areas of other gods. All the places where the water flows are under the control of gods, and it is impossible for it to grow." Dephany hesitated when he heard the river god Kophion, unsure whether to tell him to swear by the laws of the world and make his river conceptual. But is it really okay to do this? Because the rivers under the control of river god Kophion are concrete rather than abstract, if they fail, it is not a harm to river god Kophion. But Dephiny feels that the river god Kophion still needs to strengthen his strength. After all, what's wrong with strengthening his strength in such a world? So Dephiny hesitated and said, "Father, I have a way to strengthen your strength. Do you want to know?" The river god Kophion said with some interest, "Little Dephany, what can you do for you? Tell me quickly, I'll listen carefully here." The river god Kophion looked at Dephany excitedly. And in the distant sky, the forest and hunting goddess Artemis questioned the sun god Apollo, saying, "Brother Phobos, what happened to you just now? You almost left your duty without permission. You should know that you have just obtained the divine status of the sun god. Although no one can strip you of your divine power for now, this power cannot be stabilized." Upon hearing the question from the forest and hunting goddess Artemis, Apollo did not answer. A hint of violence began to rise in his heart, and he wanted to keep the deity who passed by the earth at that time by his side. "As a pet, I played with him." A hint of violence flashed in Apollo's seductive sky-blue eyes. On the other side, Dephany said to the river god Kophion, "Father, you can turn your river into an abstract concept. If you exist as a concept, then can you have even greater prospects. Unexpectedly, the river god Kofian did not have the excitement that Dephiny had imagined. Instead, he looked fearful and said to Dephiny, "No, Dephiny, where did you hear this news from? You can't say anything about it. You should know that all abstract concepts of the ocean are held in the hands of Pontus, the pit of the sea, and rivers are no exception. And I am just a deity that my parents, the ocean god Okeanos, and the mother of water, Tysas, have children under them. Even if I obtain the concept priesthood, I may not be able to keep it. After all, my parents, the ocean god Okeanos, and the mother of water, Tysas, will not stand up for me." Then Dephiny frowned and said, "Father, do you have any other way to obtain a priesthood? You should know that woman has changed from nymphu to a deity." For Dephiny, the goddess of fame, Clemene, was just born into his mother's body. He would repay this cause and effect later, but he would never call her a mother. His parents would always be one person, and that was his father, the river god, Kofian. That's why Dephiny called the goddess of fame, Clemene, that woman. Upon hearing what Dephiny had said, river god Kofian sighed. He knew why Dephiny was so dissatisfied. After all, Dephiny was not like a deity who was born into adulthood immediately. And Dephiny was just nymphu. When he was born, he needed to grow up slowly, but the goddess of fame, Clemene, was not by her side. Without hesitation, she abandoned him. It was normal to have complaints in his heart. But the river god Kofian was wrong. He did not complain. In his heart, the goddess of fame, Clemene, was just a mother body that gave birth to him. Why do he have complaints? After all, they don't know each other. As long as they repay the favor of the goddess of fame, Clemene, who gave birth to him, they will have no further relationship. In fact, Dephiny had the opportunity to become a deity, but because the goddess of fame, Clemene, did not give Dephiny any divine power when she was pregnant, she only ensured that Dephiny did not die. Moreover, the goddess of fame, Clemene, also stole some of her power from Dephiny, laying the foundation for her successful breakthrough to medium divine power in the future. This level of moderate divine power can almost be considered as the top existence in the entire world of Chaos. It should be noted that Zeus is only a god with moderate divine power now. Dephiny's father, the river god Kofian, was a deity with weak divine power. On UU reading www.uukangshu.net, it is listed as weak, and after weak, it becomes moderate. This shows how powerful that power is. If Dephiny knew about this, he would immediately sever ties with the goddess of fame, Clemene, without giving her any further assistance. And now, what Dephiny wants to think about is how to inspire the world's laws, but unfortunately, Dephiny is unlucky and does not have the favor of the world's laws. If blessed by the laws of the world, he may be able to become a deity with the ingenuity of his past life. Dephiny knew what the river god Kofian meant, so he said, "Father, forget it." Dephiny didn't want to say anything more about the resolute expression of the river god Kofian. Originally, he wanted to suggest that the river god Kofian used the power of water to control ice and snow and become the god of ice and snow. However, seeing that the river god Kofian didn't want to listen, he decided to tell the river god Kofian about this next time. But Dephiny looked at the bright moon in the sky and felt a worry in his heart. He was afraid of being imprisoned and played with by Apollo, so it was better to reopen it. Thinking of that ending, Dephiny felt waves of panic in his heart, so he decided to find other ways to fill his physical shortcomings until the day he could hold a priesthood. Thinking of this, he was going out now, and his father couldn't leave the range of this river. A hint of malice flashed in Dephiny's eyes. He knew that his face could bring him convenience, but when traveling, it would definitely attract many wolves, tigers, and leopards to covet him. So he took out a dagger and cut it on his face, but after becoming a deity, he could still recover. As for why did Dephiny do that? Chapter 5. Battlefield. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dephiny has decided to find a way to become a god, so this face of disaster for the country and the people is a burden. It was okay before, because he was by the side of river god Kofian. Although river god Kofian's level was weak, his parents were amazing. The gods living on the earth must give face to the river god Kofian. But after Dephiny went to find a way to become a god, it meant he had to leave the realm of the river god Kofian, indicating that he would lose the protection of the river god Kofian in the future. If he continued to flaunt his face on the earth after that, he might have been played to death before Apollo came to snatch him. Don't think that Dephany is overthinking, this is a normal thing on earth. If those beautiful nymphu were fortunate enough to be favored by powerful gods, her life would be better, but if not, congratulations on bringing in many hungry wolves. As for saying that the laws of the world will protect those beautiful creatures. But the premise is that he must be a deity. Even some deities cannot avoid it, let alone demigods like him. Although the earth is full of dangers now, he needs to try the method he just came up with and see if this second method can make him divine. So Dephiny smeared some dirt on his face and dusted the delicate hilton on his body, living like a refugee. Subsequently, Dephany left the place where he grew up and rushed towards those dangerous places. He knew that if he didn't become a god, he would ultimately be just an ant, and for the gods, he was just a piece of grass that could be easily kneaded. So, he didn't tell the river god Kofian what he was going to do. He was mentally prepared, and even if he died on the road, he would not regret it. After all, in this magical and magnificent world, if he had not seen the scenery of the highest road, how could he be willing? And he had a goal, which was the battlefield where the second god king, Cronus, fought against Zeus. With such a belief, we cautiously headed towards that ancient battlefield. Along the way, many gods wanted to snatch Dephany's body, but when they saw Dephany's scarred face, they lost interest. There were many situations like this, and sometimes even some nymphu wanted to snatch Dephany away. Fortunately, Dephany had scratched his appearance in advance, otherwise he might have been lying in the room of some deity, being played with by others. Dephiny finally arrived at the ancient battlefield. Looking at the land full of fierce aura, Dephiny instinctively swallowed a mouthful of saliva, but still gritted his teeth and walked in. That battlefield is said to be the place where the second king of gods, Cronus, fought against the current king of gods, Zeus. Legend has it that if you see a strange place here, it may be the blood of a deity that has been transformed. Of course, there are also hidden murders hidden here, as the blood of the gods nourishes them, and the murderous aura is rampant here, resulting in the emergence of many monsters. These monsters, transformed by the unwillingness and resentment of the gods, have been wandering on this battlefield. Ow! A monster resembling a lion, but wearing a unicorn armor with a sharp horn on its head, hovered near Dephiny. Its eyes were red, and a little saliva dripped from the corner of its mouth. Upon seeing this monster, Dephiny immediately suppressed his rapid breathing and silently prayed in his heart not to be discovered by this lion-shaped monster. I don't know if it was Dephiny's prayer that played a role, or because this lion-shaped monster was not interested in Dephiny and really left his sight. Afterwards, Dephiny arrived at the place where the lion and monster had stayed, and looked at the pitch-black land, which was permeated with a faint breath of dead spirits. Dephiny murmured, "Why didn't the undead go to harvest? It's amazing that they've been staying there all along." Then, bending down and looking around, he arrived at the land where resentment had condensed and a constant stream of coldness and ferocity had been generated, providing nourishment for the growth of warcraft. Is there no deity here to solve it? Why keep letting such places exist? With so many of them, wouldn't it shake the rule of Mount Olympus? Why not send gods to change these situations? Dephiny's sudden inspiration erupted, and he condensed all his divine power into a mixture of resentment, attempting to use his divine power to dispel the resentment and unwillingness in this land. Afterwards, the resentment disappeared only a little imperceptible, and Dephiny was somewhat disappointed. He used so much divine power, but it dissipated a trace. Just as Dephany was disappointed and wanted to leave, he found that his body seemed to have something unreal like a deity. Dephiny rubbed his eyes. You read a book www. uukeungshu.net, then carefully observed, but it seemed to disappear again. No, this should be a priesthood. The phantom I just saw was definitely not an illusion, and this method would definitely be useful. So Dephiny left here carefully and found a safe place for a while, then sat down and went to restore his divine power. After a while, Dephiny finally regained his divine power. He was surprised to find that his body seemed to have a little more divine power, so he continued to move towards the land and used his divine power again to dispel these grievances. I don't know if Delphine's eyes are blurred, his divine power seems to be able to dispel more resentment, but Delphine didn't care about such a small matter. When his divine power was depleted, Dephiny carefully observed his body and finally found an illusory divine figure appearing in his soul, which then disappeared. Delphine's face was filled with ecstasy. Really, this way you can really obtain a priesthood, really great. Dephiny returned to the place he had previously called a barely protected place with an enthusiastic expression on his face. It is said to be a protected area, which is just a small cave with half a stone blocking the entrance and some vines forming a protective umbrella. After Dephiny entered, he carefully tidied up the things in their original state, then returned to the deepest part of the cave, sat down cross-legged, seized the time to regain his divine power, and then went there to pass the resentment. Finally, after the second restoration of divine power, he immediately ran towards the concentration of resentment, and then burst out of his divine power, combining it with the resentment. This time, the resentment dissipated by the divine power was even greater. Delphiny also noticed this time that the resentment he had dissipated increased, and his heart began to beat. Is this in the process of becoming a god? Chapter 6. Purification of the Divine Character. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dephiny continued to repeat this action more than a dozen times, barely dissipating half of the resentment in the polluted land before him. Finally, his divine power has risen to a certain level, and the divine power he possesses in his body is 10 times more than before he came here. The more dangerous the place is, the more opportunities are hidden. Wait. I seem to have gone back and forth more than 10 times like this. At first, it took me half an hour to recover my divine power, but gradually it took me an hour to do so. The journey took half an hour, so it took me an hour to go back and forth. And now the sky is hazy, at the junction of day and night. According to this calculation, I have passed almost 3 days, which startled Dephiny. He actually passed 3 days, but he did not feel any hunger. Just as Dephiny was thinking, a warning appeared in his soul, signaling him to run quickly. He chose to believe the warning from his soul and quickly ran back to the shelter. Half an hour after Dephiny ran back to the shelter, the roars from the land where Dephiny was staying seemed to be affecting Warcraft like something dirty had appeared. The land that had been partially purified by Dephiny returned to its original state of Yang Zicheong, still full of resentment, but the difference was that it still carried a hint of the fierce aura of a demon beast. After staying in the shelter for 3 days, Dephiny cautiously went out to check the situation. However, he found that the land had returned to its original state. He not only did not feel uncomfortable, but also felt happy. With this piece of land and a few more visits, could he still regain his divine power? Realizing this, he diligently began his work of clearing resentment. If this efficiency were seen by the gods on Mount Olympus, it would definitely be regarded as a mental illness. No normal deity would go to work as soon as they recover, and purify their grievances as soon as their divine power is restored. If the gods of Olympus were to come, they would probably consume half of their divine power and leave, and then rest for hundreds of years before working again. Of course, these rules are normal for gods other than the sun goddess, moon goddess, and underworld goddess. 10 years have passed like this. Dephiny has finally completely purified this small piece of land, and his divine power has a strong restraining effect on resentment. Dephiny's divine energy has reached a critical point in his body, which can be broken through with just a little. In these 10 years, Dephiny has also suffered, even cried. He doesn't know the meaning of what he did. Can he really get a priest by doing this? He doubted himself time and time again, wanting to give up. But thinking of the rules of this world, he gritted his teeth and persisted. He wanted to become a god, he wanted to go to the pinnacle of this world to see. And Apollo once wanted to find Dephiny, but could not find his trace no matter what, because the battlefield where Dephiny was located could conceal the traces of the creatures inside, which also led to Apollo's inability to find Dephiny. Afterwards, Apollo gave up and life seemed to return to the right track. And this time, Dephiny felt a critical point in his body. He was a bit nervous, he felt like he had to kill a warcraft to become a god. He can't help roast up to now. It's easy to get a priest's post in the world of chows, isn't it? You can get the desired god by swearing to the world law. In fact, there is no problem with Dephini's thinking, but this rule only applies to creatures favored by world laws. Semi-gods like Dephiny cannot enjoy this treatment at all, and even after Dephiny becomes a god, there is no way to do so. As Dephiny said, only the proud sons of heaven can receive treatment, which is commonly known as the sons of the world. As for Dephinius, it is impossible because there is a paradox that the son of the world must have been ordained from the beginning, rather than starting from a demigod. Then Dephiny took a deep breath, no longer overthinking, as he gradually ground off the branches of the surrounding trees. I don't know why the trees here are so sturdy that even Warcraft can't destroy them at will, and Dephiny relied on the convenience of divine power to grind down the branches from the trees. However, despite this, Dephiny still spent 3 days grinding them down, which shows how hard these trees are. Subsequently, Dephiny slowly used divine power to cut the end of the tree into thorns, which took Dephiny 3 days. However, Dephiny still felt dissatisfied. What if the tree in his hand broke while hunting that monster? So he repeated this 3 times and got a total of 4 such sharp branches. Then he tied these branches to his tough back and carefully hid his figure to the place where the lion-like monster often frequented. Reading www.uukangshu.net. This lion warcraft has linjia, so it can only attack towards its mouth, eyes, nose, genitals, and chrysanthemums. Otherwise, it may not even be able to break through defense. Subsequently, Dephiny took a deep breath and arrived at the place where the lion warcraft was staying. The current lion warcraft is still sleeping, and Dephiny looked at this opportunity. So Dephiny took the branch in his hand and shot it towards the eye, but it did not break through the defense. Instead, it woke up the lion warcraft. Then it woke up and saw Dephiny standing on the side, holding a branch spear, and angrily attacked Dephiny. Watching the arrival of the lion warcraft, Dephiny didn't panic either. He had simulated this situation many times, and then Dephiny took out a branch spear and inserted it into the lion warcraft's mouth as soon as it arrived. However, because the branch was a bit short, it caused the warcraft to become even more violent. So Dephiny could only grit his teeth and retreat, while the lion warcraft saw the fleeing Dephiny with a fierce expression. A tiger pounced towards Dephiny. Seeing this scene, Dephiny had no choice but to underestimate the defense level of the linjia as he couldn't run away from the warcraft. Then he took a step forward, unsure if it was warcraft's mistake or if Dephiny was lucky. Dephiny arrived in the direction of the warcraft's genitalia, so he instinctively thrust towards the protruding area of his genitalia. The lion warcraft, who was rushing towards Dephiny, felt a severe pain that made its limbs weak. Taking advantage of this, Dephiny stabbed in this direction several more times, and the lion warcraft frothed directly at its mouth. But the fierce light in its eyes flickered, and resentment also emerged from all around its body, in harmony with its surroundings. Chapter 7. Fengshen. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dephiny knew that something was not good when he saw the fierce look in the eyes of this lion demon beast, even in harmony with the surrounding environment. This lion warcraft is a type of warcraft called the linjia lion. Although it may not rank high on the entire battlefield, it is a hegemon in the surrounding area of Dephiny. Moreover, it is a demon beast bred from the sweat of Kleos, one of the previous 12 main gods, combined with the ferocity of the battlefield. If he had not appeared in this land but wielded it in other places like the Three Sisters of Revenge, the present Linjia lion would have become a god. However, even though it cannot become a deity due to its ferocity, its combat power is not inferior to that of ordinary deities, and some weaker deities may even be slaughtered by it. However, Depheny is the only exception. If Depheny observes carefully, he will find that his divine power has a similar corrosive effect on the scaled lion. This is because although Depheny has not become a deity, his divine power has gradually brought purification effects. Although he has not formed a deity, he is almost the same as a deity with a deity, at most in terms of lifespan. Seeing that the warcraft had completely lost its sanity, Depheny's heart flashed with a hint of regret, but he extinguished it the next second. In DeFini's dictionary, there is no room for regret. Now it's either dead or I'm dead. DeFini gritted his teeth, his eyes fixed on every possibility of defeating the scallion. After the scallion went crazy and lost his sanity, DeFini found that although the scallion's strength and speed had increased, it would only rush towards DeFini according to instinct, without changing direction. DeFini also relied on this pattern to avoid the scallion's attacks time and time again. Then, he took out the last branch and put it in his hand. He wrapped it around with divine power, hoping that it would make the branch more resilient. At the moment when the lion rushed over, DeFini used all his strength to stab the lion's eyes. The lion seemed to feel a dangerous aura and wanted to instinctively turn around, but how could DeFini let it succeed? So he used his greatest strength in his life to stab the lion's eyes. Subsequently, the scallion let out a mournful cry, which inserted into the lion's eyes. DeFini's divine power instinctively confronted the scallion's body, followed by a growling sound. The flesh and blood in the scallion's eye sockets quickly melted like white snow encountering flames. Then the scallion began to twitch, but still wanted to open its mouth to bite DeFini, but how could DeFini let it succeed? So, while sending the divine power through the eye sockets into the scallion's body, it tightly grasped the scallion's mouth until it remained motionless and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Later, seeing that the scaled lion had lost its breath, he released it and sat down on the ground, panting heavily. He didn't even notice any blood stains on his arm due to excessive force. After a while, after Dephany had enough rest, the laws of the world bestowed favor upon him. If we use Dephany's past life, it would be considered merit. Of course, with Dephany's achievements, it is impossible to receive favor, but he works hard. He has been purifying his resentment without rest for the past decade, although it has had almost no impact on the entire world of Chaos. So for the first time, the world rules have discovered that there are gods who work so hard and love the world so much. No, demigods who are about to become gods. Anyway, they are about to become gods and must be rewarded, big rewards. What? Is his level too low? It's okay, it takes so long to improve slowly, and the deity that was just about to condense in his soul. Purification is enough to support him to become a medium divine power deity. It will be much easier for him to resolve the grievances on this land when he becomes a deity with moderate divine power. Subsequently, under the rewards of the laws of the world, DeFini's purification priesthood was finally formed. Subsequently, under the urging of the world's favor, the deity cleansed DeFini's body, allowing it to become a divine body. Subsequently, the face on DeFini's face, which had been scratched by himself, returned to his handsome appearance, and all the damage he had caused during this hunting of Warcraft was healed. DeFini shook his hand and found that his divine body was more than several times stronger than before. He felt that his power was more of an auxiliary priesthood. Although he could only purify his resentment now, all other than himself were heretics, so he should be purified. This kind of power is not impossible afterwards. After all, this clergy was shaped by him and should also be decided by him. Subsequently, the laws of the world urged Depheny to declare his existence to the world. So Depheny declared to the world, "I am Depheny, the deity in charge of purification." After Dephany finished speaking, Yu read a book www.uukangshu.net and Dephany went back to his home. After all, he was already a deity, and he was a relatively noble existence among the gods. He symbolized the purification of the origin, and even death would return from the law. But I didn't dare to kill him because he is a precious primordial god in the world. Every time a primordial god dies, it represents a loss of this law, which will greatly affect the balance of the world. All beings who kill the primordial god will be punished by the strictest laws of the world. Just like the brutal rule of the first god King Uranus, he is now sleeping in the deepest part of the sky, without any resistance, and no one dares to kill him because the first god King Uranus is the primordial god. So Dephany's purifying deity is equivalent to his life-saving talisman, and no one dares to disrespect him, even Zeus cannot dispose of him at will. And according to Ningfu, who was by Dephini's side, His Highness Apollo, who was riding the sun chariot in the sky, had no primordial priesthood. Of course, this was passed down by other Ningfu, and no one knows if Apollo was hidden. After all, Apollo is the most beloved child of the divine King Zeus. Dephiny, who was originally heading towards his father, the river god Kofian's palace, suddenly stopped. He seemed to have just received the favor of the laws of the world. If this was similar in nature to the acquisition of merit, could he learn the operation of the flower saint? Anyway, even if he failed, he wouldn't be able to succeed. Afterwards, Dephiny swore to the laws of the world, saying, "I am the god of purification, Dephiny. I swear here to the laws of the world that I will purify all the remaining grievances on the land of Chaos. When the remaining grievances disappear, I will become a deity with weak divine power." The laws of the world have taken Dephiny's oath. Chapter 8. Dephiny, the God of Mist. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The laws of the world have taken the oath of Dephiny and read it out to all the lives of the world of Chaos. But there was no reward of half a penny given to Dephiny, and the people of Dephiny were all foolish. Isn't the method of spending money like a saint working? Why is it that he only has it after completion, while Huabei's saint can use it first? Thinking of this, Dephiny could only helplessly walk towards the place full of resentment. He sighed and looked at the endless battlefield. He felt a bit overwhelmed, but fortunately there was no time limit before, otherwise he would really collapse. Even Dephiny could only accept his fate and rush towards the direction of the ancient battlefield, watching the land soaked in resentment, and then stimulating his divine power to shine brightly on the land. This is a small magic he discovered when he was bored before. It is relatively easy to release at a low level, but it does not have any attack power, only showcasing the power of the priest. Then Dephiny began to shine a little light on the land he had walked through and walked towards it. After a while, Dephiny felt a bit uncomfortable because the newly purified land had changed back, and it was unclear whether it was due to his religious duties. This resentment filled the air, and it was foreseeable that this ancient battlefield would also be more dangerous. Suddenly, Dephiny saw the river in the distance, and his eyes lit up. He was the son of the river god Kofian and the goddess of fame, Clemene. Although the main priesthood of the goddess of fame, Clemene, is related to fame, her essence is also that she was deified by Henif. Her body still has a strong water attribute of heaven and earth elemental power. So as their child Dephiny is no exception, he also has a high talent for using water. So he combined the power of purification with water, and then reluctantly merged together. Dephiny looked at it and said, "This is called holy water. Purifying the water of resentment." Dephiny was somewhat dissatisfied because it was actually a combination of divine power and water, which other gods could also achieve. He casually threw this holy water onto the ground. The place where the land and holy water pass through has created a void of resentment and has been purified completely. So Delphine's eyes lit up. If I could use water extensively to impregnate this land, I believe I could quickly resolve the grievances here. Then Dephiny began to think, looking at the river not far away. He wanted to become the river god, but the next second he rejected it because the river god could only manage the surrounding areas. Then Dephiny looked at the sky, but immediately suppressed that thought. The field of rainfall is the authority of Zeus, and he couldn't bear to think about his priesthood. Even if Zeus himself didn't have the priesthood of rainfall, the sky belonged to him. Whoever dares to invade it may not have been rebuilt by Zeus with a lightning bolt from birth. He is the primordial god and cannot be killed casually, but finding a reason is not easy, and he can also force other nymphu or demigods to do it, without necessarily doing it himself. Anyway, Zeus has many ways to kill Dephiny, so let's try a different one. The power of this rainfall is absolutely unacceptable. Then Dephiny looked around and found many priests. Twilight, aurora, radiance, trees, and even the thought of tsunamis and other divine powers. But thinking about these clergy, although no one has them, isn't it cutting off the power of those gods to make these clergy appear? Starting like this is no better than offending Zeus. So Dephiny had no choice but to scoop up a wave of water and then add the power of purification to it, and then sprinkle it on the ground. So he arrived at the forest where he used to make branch spears, and a hint of nostalgia flashed on his face. If it weren't for the credit of that branch, he might not have been able to kill the Lingia lion. He couldn't have become a god so early. Afterwards, Dephiny touched the tree that had helped him. Suddenly, his eyes froze and he thought of something. Why is there no fog? It's already early morning. Dephiny couldn't believe he was still looking up at the sky and realized that Apollo's solar car had not yet set off. Afterwards, Dephiny looked ecstatic and used the water from the river. He made the water very fine and dense, and then scattered it in the forest. Afterwards, Dephiny swore to the laws of the world and said, I am the god of purification, Dephiny. I turn water into small particles and suspend them in the air. I am called mist, I am the god of mist. Upon hearing Dephiny's words, the laws of the world hesitated for a long time, seeming to be weighing the pros and cons. It took a long time to integrate the priesthood of mist into Dephiny's body. Afterwards, Dephiny combined the mist with purification, and slowly spread from his body. Dephiny now found that he was more satisfied with the use of this water. Yu reading www.uukangshu.net. And the ocean god Okeanos, who was far away in the ocean, spoke to the mother of water, Thesis, and said, This is the child of Capion. It's quite good that he can become a god, so let him have this priesthood. But what should our children do? Although they haven't started to master this part of the power, if they don't have this power, they will become low-level nymphu. Then let them become gods for Dephiny. I believe he will accept his relatives. It's just some origin, and I think he will give us face, said Tizes, the mother of the water source, frowning, but what if he doesn't want it? This mist priesthood isn't given to him by us, it's something he comprehends to purify that battlefield. Ocean god Okeanos said with some concern. But this deity is really powerful. He actually wants to eliminate resentment, this ambition is really great. He has so many calculations, and I don't know what he wants, exclaimed the ocean god Okeanos with emotion. And the mother of the water source next to her, Tess, looked uncomfortable and said, He must treat my daughters well. It was he who took away my daughter's misty priesthood. This priesthood was originally understood by Dephiny himself, and those were just nymphu who carried water vapor, which was different from what Dephiny said about mist. After all, one is suspended and used to purify the air, while the other is simply nourished by the mastery of water to please the earth mother Gaia. Ocean god Okeanos frowned and said, How do you feel about this, Dephiny? Did you help us complete it? The mother of the water source, Tess, fell silent for a long time before saying, We should be a little better to the river god, Kophion. Chapter 9. Purification Mist. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After obtaining the priesthood of mist, Dephiny clearly felt that his divine power had increased, but the laws of the world required him to lay mist in the world in the early morning. Now, due to flaws in the law and the fact that Dephiny acquired this deity at the moment of the sun's rise, the world law naturally assumes that mist will appear before the sun rises. However, Depheny's divine power was unable to spread mist throughout the world of Chaos, so Depheny requested that mist only appear in a few places, which was accepted by the laws of the world. So DeFini had the right to scatter fog freely in the morning and could also decide where to appear, but the time was limited to this time in the morning. Of course, it can also appear at other times, but the consumed divine power will increase exponentially. Afterwards, Depheny enveloped half of the area where the war was taking place and combined it with purified power. It was not that Depheny did not want to envelop the entire war, but rather that he truly had a heart, after all, his power was not so strong. Around this point, the mist placed by Depheny in the morning almost consumed all the divine power of his body, and finally combined the power of purification. When the divine power is depleted, it means that Depheny has no binding power at all, but he does not regret it because it can accelerate his level improvement. Moreover, because he has just become a deity and his power is weak, he can only accelerate his level accumulation by continuously fulfilling his divine duties. After the last bit of divine power was depleted, Depheny still found the previous shelter and hid inside, falling into the sleep of the day. In theory, gods do not actually need to sleep unless the injury is severe or there are other reasons. However, in order to accelerate the recovery of divine power and the habits he has developed before, Depheny immediately fell into a deep sleep after the divine power was depleted. If this were to be seen by the elderly, who couldn't help but envy them, it would be so easy for them to fall into a state of sleep. How embarrassing it would be for those who suffer from insomnia. But the next day when Depheny woke up, he found that there was still a thin mist in the forest where he had stayed before. After careful study, he found that as long as the mist was not directly exposed to sunlight and the temperature nearby was slightly colder, there was still a high possibility that the mist would remain. Afterwards, Depheny carefully looked around and found that there were scattered normal tree colors on the trees in the forest, instead of the gray and lifeless feeling before, and there were also some green on the pitch-black leaves. Depheny gently raised his eyebrows. Is this where the mist is attached? So does fog still have some absorption function? Depheny looked at the sky and as it was almost time, he extinguished his desire to study. The most important thing for him now was to accumulate divine power, so that he could quickly improve his level. He continued to sow mist as he did on the first day, and then incorporated the power of purification into it. This time he still retained a trace of divine power, ensuring that he did not fall into sleep. He saw the mist and the scattered resentment in the air intertwined, making a hissing sound, as if something had been corroded. Afterwards, some of the mist disappeared before it reached the ground, and Depheny sighed how good it would be if there were the power of rainfall. This is much faster, rather than relying solely on fog to slowly dissipate. It will take at least a few hundred years for this posture to dissipate the resentment in this place. And this is also based on the fact that Depheny has been releasing divine power, the actual situation will only be more, not less. This is making Depheny very uncomfortable. Suddenly, while Delphine was thinking, he realized that there was a ghost in the distant forest. When he came into contact with the mist, he let out screams of agony. Afterwards, Depheny was immediately attracted and found that the undead had been dead for a long time. It should have been the life that died during the great war between the gods and kings. Depheny frowned and looked at the undead with some dissatisfaction. After all, the resentment on the undead was the most difficult to remove. It was discovered that there would be at least more, and the time for purification would also be longer. Why haven't the gods of the underworld come to take away these undead spirits? In fact, this is also a misunderstanding of the gods in the underworld by Depheny. They have come and cleaned it up, although there were some omissions, not many. And they have to control the reception of the undead on the entire earth, without the ability to clean up this area, and most of the power of the underworld gods is not very strong, so it is still very dangerous to come to this battlefield. Not all gods have a priest like Depheny who specializes in special attacks on warcraft. So the gods of the underworld will not come here to collect the undead. After all, they are so busy on the earth that they still care about this place. Especially in the previous Tianhua cataclysm, all the creatures on the earth were almost dead and injured except for the place where the gods were located. If Dephany had been born a few years earlier, he would have appreciated that howling disaster. The fire disaster that day led to the extinction of 99% of life on the earth, and even to this day, there are still some areas where flames still exist, affecting the environment of the earth, which DeFini is not aware of. Subsequently, Dephiny could only reluctantly start his arduous life, but did not realize that the favor on him was gradually increasing. Dephiny slowly realized that his speed of accumulating divine power seemed to have accelerated, and later he realized that his favor seemed to have increased. That's right, it's strange that the laws of the world don't like cows and horses like me. And I can also serve as a role model. If the gods on Mount Olympus, who only know how to hold silver parties all day, knew that I had received so much favor, they would definitely follow suit, right, said Dephiny with self-deprecation. In fact, it was Dephiny who overthought it. Even if Delphine's example was presented to them, they wouldn't take a glance. After all, they are all immortal, and most of the gods on Mount Olympus are primordial gods. The rest are not closely related to Zeus, so there is no need to pay attention to Dephiny. And favor. Are there many? What's the use of it? Anyway, they won't die, at most they'll be mocked a few times. It's over, can't we continue playing? Why do we have to fulfill these religious duties or something? The meaning is clear. So the situation that Dephiny said basically doesn't exist. Don't forget, the sun god Apollo and the moon goddess Selene are not included. They were really miserable, playing half of the time day and night compared to the other gods. Of course, they are much luckier than Dephany, and they may not have to fulfill their religious duties. Chapter 10. Thick Fog and Frost. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Decades have passed, and Dephiny has been diligently spreading mist on this battlefield, allowing the power of purification to permeate. The plants on this land have barely turned green, at least on the surface. Moreover, during the time that Dephiny worked, the world of Chaos underwent tremendous changes. Firstly, the sleeping mother Gaia developed a great fondness for Dephiny, the god of purification and mist whom she had never met before, even though she had never seen Dephiny before. On this battlefield filled with a cold and gloomy atmosphere, fierce monsters and dark winds inhabit. Driven by the laws of the world and recognized by the Earth Mother, this land damaged by war is assumed to belong to Dephiny. As long as Dephiny completely purifies this place, Dephiny will become a regional god. The regional god who commands the entire land of war. But now this beautiful idea has nothing to do with Dephiny, because he feels that staying like this is no longer necessary, and even if he is not there, purified mist can appear. As for why? That's because Dephiny has fallen asleep multiple times due to spreading purified mist. Although this is a normal thing for Dephiny, the laws of the world are heartbroken. After such a continuous year, the laws of the world bestowed upon Dephiny the staff of purification. As long as Dephiny placed this staff in a place with sufficient water sources, and as long as Dephiny did not encounter any problems, this staff could continuously appear to purify the mist. This greatly saves Dephiny's divine power and allows him to have time to play and do other things. If it weren't for the gods not dying, the laws of the world would be really afraid that Dephiny would suddenly die. So the laws of the world hurriedly bestowed this primordial artifact, while also fulfilling the duties of the mist god. This will give Dephiny a chance to rest, and he did indeed start resting after receiving this scepter, but Dephiny was more thinking about how to obtain other priesthood. Later, as Dephiny watched the fine droplets of water float, he had a hint of measurement in his heart. This was fog. What would fog become if it were in a cold area? Dephiny knew that there would be ice and snow in his past life, but this world has never had the power of ice and snow, which means he can even obtain this priesthood. When I thought of this, Dephiny felt a bit regretful. If only he had been born earlier. This way, he won't miss the difficulty of the heavenly fire, so that after obtaining the ice and snow divinity, it is even possible to directly ascend to medium divine power with this achievement in saving the world. Dephiny sighed, although the appearance of ice and snow may not be as valuable now, there are still some places on the earth that need ice and snow to extinguish flames, as for the group of gods who rely on Olympus Mountain. It's not that Dephiny looks down on them. If they could move their noble bodies, even a few people, the flames on the earth would have long been extinguished. But they didn't. They just had to wait until the flames naturally extinguished. As for the human demigods on the earth, Ningfu had nothing to do with them. After death, they will create another batch, and the laws of the Ningfu world will be created. When the gods are born, they will appear. The children born by the gods may also be Ningfu, and they cannot die completely. After a period of time, the earth will become vibrant again. Why do they still put in so much effort to do these things? With this idea in mind, wouldn't it be good for them to come to the party a few more times? Why do you want to waste yourself so much? That's right, these are the thoughts of most of the gods on Mount Olympus. After all, as long as they fulfill their obligations, what else does it matter to them? Dephiny looked at the direction of Mount Olympus with self-deprecation. Perhaps he was the lowest in the eyes of the gods on those towering Mount Olympus. Then Dephiny walked all the way towards the cold place, and finally arrived at a place where the sun could not shine on him all year round. Afterwards, Dephiny began to disperse the mist here, waiting quietly for these mists to be eroded by the cold force and turned into frost. Cold. I will eventually master this clergy. Dephiny's eyes flashed with fierce ambition. He wanted to step by step up to the highest point of this world, and he wanted to see what the scenery above this world was. But it wasn't as easy as he thought. In the coldest of times, mist still dispersed around him instead of frost. Frost is a solid mist that adheres to all tangible objects, while mist is a liquid frost that will appear in cold places. Afterwards, Dephiny gradually controlled the water vapor around him and forcefully sucked in the cold atmosphere. With this operation, the surrounding air was even hotter than the place that had been exposed to the sun. Afterwards, Dephiny combined these cold forces with water vapor, and after reading www.uukangshu.net, he used the power of divine power to turn them into solid power. Dephiny breathed a sigh of relief, finally succeeding. This was the beginning of the frost, and then Dephiny slowly spread it throughout the entire valley, which was like a ever-changing child, sometimes cold and sometimes hot. There was even a wind in the entire valley, but it was caused by the uneven distribution of heat and cold, which began to balance the two. In that moment, an illusory deity appeared in Dephiny's soul. But this deity is different from other deities. Other deities are usually multi-faceted, while the piece in Dephiny's soul is divided into two halves, connected by a small thread-like object in the middle. But underneath the silk thread is something similar to a tray. If Dephiny could observe it, he would be surprised and say, "This deity looks like a scale." But this deity flickered in Dephiny's soul and disappeared without noticing it, still enthusiastically spreading frost throughout the entire valley. Finally, when Dephiny spread the power of frost throughout the valley, the laws of the world decreed to bestow upon Dephiny the divine form of frost. From that moment on, Dephiny's deity became the god of purification and frost mist. Moreover, the laws of the world have granted Dephiny a privilege, which is that wherever there is fog and frost, the situation in that area will be reflected in Dephiny's eyes. Of course, this ability requires the consumption of divine power. If divine power is not needed, this ability would be too abnormal. Ah! Did anyone become a god just now? Anyway, let's continue with the banquet, brothers. The group gods who were really at the banquet on Mount Olympus did not pay attention to Delphine's acquisition of another priesthood.